They told you inflation was over. They lied. What happened this morning at the US-Canada border is the spark for inflation 2.0. Canada isn't just a friendly neighbor. They are the grocery store for American industry. They supply the oil for our refineries, the fertilizer for our farms, and the aluminum for our soda cans. When you slap a 100% tax on the raw materials of life, prices don't just creep up. They explode. Welcome to the era of $10 per gallon of milk. I spent this morning reading through the trade data, the dependency numbers, the supply chain maps, and what I found should terrify anyone who pays a mortgage, buys groceries, or drives a car. Because the threat of a 100% tariff on Canadian imports isn't a negotiating tactic. It's a loaded gun pointed at the American consumer. And if that trigger gets pulled, the bill lands on your kitchen table. President Trump calls it leverage. I call it a sales tax on your life. Let me be very clear about what a tariff actually is. Despite what you hear on cable news, a tariff is not paid by the foreign country. It's not paid by Canadian companies. It's paid by the American importer at the moment goods cross the border into the United States. That's the law. That's how customs works. And once that importer pays the tax, they do exactly what you'd expect. They pass it on to the distributor, to the wholesaler, to the retailer, and finally, to you. But here's where it gets worse. The tariff doesn't just pass through the supply chain once. In modern manufacturing, especially in the automotive and construction sectors, that same component crosses the border multiple times before it reaches you. And at every crossing, the tariff compounds. This is what industry insiders call the 7 crossings rule, and it's about to make your next car purchase a nightmare. Here's how it works. Let's say you're buying a Ford F-150. That truck isn't built in one factory in one country. It's assembled from parts that move back and forth across the US-Canada border an average of 7 times during production. An aluminum engine block gets cast in Quebec. It crosses into Michigan for machining. It goes back to Ontario for quality testing. Then it returns to Ohio for installation into the engine. Then the entire engine crosses back into Canada for integration into the vehicle chassis. Then the chassis returns to the United States for final assembly. Then the finished truck might cross one more time for retail sale in Canada or border states. Under normal free trade, those crossings are invisible. No tariffs, no friction. The truck gets built efficiently and the consumer gets a competitive price. But under a 25% tariff regime, let's do the math. Start with the transmission. Base manufacturing cost, $1,200. It crosses the border. 25% tariff. Now it costs $1,500. That transmission goes back to Canada for testing. Crosses again. Another 25% tariff on the new value. Now it's $1,875. By the time that transmission is crossed 7 times, the compounding effect has pushed the cost to levels that make the vehicle unaffordable for the average buyer. And we're not talking about 25% anymore. We're talking about 100%. If a 100% tariff hits every border crossing, the multiplication becomes catastrophic. A $50 component that crosses 7 times doesn't cost $100. It doesn't cost $200. It costs thousands. Because each time it crosses, the tariff applies to the new inflated value, not the original base cost. This isn't theory. This is how industrial supply chains actually work. And the automotive industry has already run the numbers. They estimate that a 100% tariff regime would add between $12,000 and $15,000 to the price of a typical vehicle with significant Canadian content. Let me say that again. $12,000 to $15,000 added to the sticker price of your next car. Not because the car got better, not because labor costs went up, because the government decided to tax the movement of parts across an imaginary line 7 times instead of 0. Ford Motor Company learned this lesson the hard way during the 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs. Even though Ford sourced 95% of its steel domestically, the tariff still cost the company $1 billion in a single year. $1 billion. Because American steel producers saw the tariff as a price umbrella and raised their own prices to match the inflated cost of imports. Ford couldn't win, and neither can you. Now let's talk about your house, or more precisely, the house you're trying to buy. The United States imports 85% of its softwood lumber from Canada. Softwood lumber is the framing material for 90% of new homes in America. The 2x4s, the joists, the beams, the structural skeleton of the American dream. And Canada provides 1/3 of all the lumber consumed in the United States because our domestic sawmills are running at only 64% capacity. We literally cannot produce enough lumber domestically to meet demand. So when you put a 100% tariff on Canadian lumber, you're not protecting American sawmills. You're doubling the cost of building a house. Let me walk you through the math. A typical 2,400 square foot single-family home requires about 15,000 board feet of framing lumber. As of early 2026, the price of framing lumber is approximately $872 per thousand board feet. A 100% tariff doubles that cost. So the lumber alone goes from around $13,000 to $26,000. But it doesn't stop there. Because lumber prices don't just affect the wood, they affect everything. When builders see lumber costs double, they know the entire project timeline is at risk. Supply becomes uncertain. Financing costs go up because banks see the risk. And every contractor along the way, from the framer to the electrician to the plumber, raises their prices because they know the market can bear it. The National Association of Home Builders ran the numbers. A 100% tariff on Canadian lumber adds approximately $51,750 to the cost of a new home just from the framing lumber. Add in the tariffs on kitchen cabinets, which are also majority Canadian imports, and facing 50% tariffs that could go to 100%. Add in wood flooring, add in windows and doors, add in the financing costs. The total bill? $76,000 to $80,000 added to the price of a new home. Let me put that in perspective. The median home price in the United States is around $400,000. An $80,000 tariff surcharge is a 20% increase. That's the difference between qualifying for a mortgage and being priced out of homeownership entirely. That's the difference between the American dream and a lifetime of renting. And here's the cruelest irony. The people who will be hurt most by this are the same people the tariffs are supposedly designed to protect. Working-class Americans, young families, first-time buyers. The people who need affordable housing the most are the ones who will pay the highest price. But it's not just housing, it's energy. And if you live in the Midwest, you're about to get crushed. The United States imports 4.2 million barrels of crude oil from Canada every day. That's 60% of all our imported oil, and it's not evenly distributed. The Midwest, specifically the region known as PAD2, gets 70% of its refinery crude from Canada. 100% of crude imports into the Midwest come from a single source, Canada. Now here's the technical problem. Midwest refineries were specifically engineered to process heavy sour crude oil from the Canadian oil sands. This is thick, viscous, high-sulfur oil that requires specialized equipment called coking units to break it down into gasoline and diesel. These refineries cannot simply switch to light sweet crude from Texas or North Dakota. The equipment doesn't work that way. The chemistry doesn't work that way. If you put light crude into a refinery designed for heavy crude, you hit what engineers call operating constraints, lower yields, equipment damage, potential shutdowns. It's not a matter of preference, it's a matter of physics. So, when someone tells you that Midwest refineries should just stop buying Canadian oil and switch to American oil, they're telling you something that is technically impossible without spending billions of dollars and years of time to completely rebuild those facilities. Which means, if you put a 100% tariff on Canadian crude, Midwest refiners have exactly two choices: pay the tax and pass it to consumers, or shut down and create fuel shortages. They're going to choose option one. And you're going to pay for it. Here's the math. Canadian crude is currently priced around $75 per barrel. A 100% tariff adds $75 of tax. So the cost to the refiner goes from $75 to $150 per barrel. That's a doubling of the feedstock cost. There's a rule of thumb in the oil industry. Every $1 increase in the price of crude oil results in approximately 2.4 cents per gallon increase in the price of gasoline at the pump. If crude costs go up $75 per barrel due to the tariff, that's a $1.80 per gallon increase in the price of gas. Let me say that clearly. $1.80 per gallon added to the price of gas in the Midwest. Not because of a supply disruption, not because of a war, because of a tax. If gas is currently $3.50 per gallon in Minnesota, it goes to $5.30. If it's $3.70 in Illinois, it goes to $5.50. And that's assuming the tariff is the only variable. If Canada decides to retaliate with export restrictions, which they absolutely could do, You're looking at shortages and prices that could spike even higher. $5.50 per gallon doesn't just hurt your commute, it destroys the entire regional economy. Freight costs go up, food distribution costs go up. Every business that relies on transportation, which is every business, sees their margins evaporate, and all of those costs get passed to you. But we're not done, because the worst part of this tariff nightmare isn't the car you can't afford, or the house you can't buy, or the gas you can't pay for. It's the food you can't eat. Let me trace a chain for you. A chain that starts in the mines of Saskatchewan and ends with the price of milk in your refrigerator. Canada produces 85% of the potash consumed in the United States. Potash is potassium, an essential nutrient for crops. Without potash, crop yields collapse. Plants can't fight disease, soil fertility degrades, and there is no domestic substitute. The United States produces less than 10% of its own potash. We are completely dependent on Canadian imports. Now, a 100% tariff on potash means the price goes from $450 per ton to $900 per ton. That cost gets absorbed by fertilizer companies who pass it to distributors, who pass it to farmers. For a corn farmer, this is catastrophic. Corn is the most potash-intensive crop in the United States. Farmers use roughly 150 pounds of potash per acre. When the price doubles, the cost of production for corn goes up by 12%. But corn isn't just corn. Corn is the foundation of the American food system. Corn is livestock feed. Cows eat corn, pigs eat corn, chickens eat corn. When the price of corn goes up 12%, the cost of feeding livestock goes up 12%. And when the cost of feeding a dairy cow goes up, the price of milk goes up. This is the domino effect. Potash tariff leads to expensive fertilizer. Expensive fertilizer leads to expensive corn. Expensive corn leads to expensive cow feed. Expensive cow feed leads to expensive milk. It's not a direct line, it's a cascade. And at each stage, the costs compound. Dairy farmers operate on razor-thin margins. When feed costs spike, they can't absorb it. They pass it to the dairy co-ops. The co-ops pass it to the processors. The processors pass it to the grocery stores. And the grocery stores pass it to you. In 2025, grocery bills were already up 6 to 13% due to baseline tariffs. Under a 100% tariff scenario, analysts are projecting an additional 15 to 20% increase in food costs. That's compounding inflation. That's not a blip. That's a structural repricing of food. And it's not just milk. It's meat. It's bread. It's every processed food that uses corn syrup or corn oil or corn derivatives, which is almost everything in the center aisles of your grocery store. The bill for a family of 4 for a simple summer cookout, burgers, hot dogs, soda, corn on the cob, was already climbing. Under a 100% tariff regime, that same meal could cost 30 to 40% more than it did 2 years ago. This is the inflation bomb. And it's not theoretical. It's mathematical. We have been here before. And the lesson from history is unambiguous. In 1930, the United States passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It raised duties on over 20,000 imported goods by an average of 20%. The goal was to protect American farmers and manufacturers during the early years of the Great Depression. The result was a global trade war. 25 countries retaliated with their own tariffs on American exports. International trade collapsed by 65% between 1929 and 1934. American exports to countries that retaliated fell by 28 to 32%. And the tariffs that were supposed to protect jobs ended up destroying them. The U.S. economy spiraled deeper into depression. Economists widely credit Smoot-Hawley with making the Great Depression worse and longer than it needed to be. The lesson was supposed to be definitive. Tariffs don't protect your economy. They strangle it. But we're doing it again. And this time, the stakes are higher. Because in 1930, the U.S. wasn't as integrated with the global economy as it is today. In 1930, we didn't have just-in-time supply chains. We didn't have 7 border crossings for a single car part. We didn't import 85% of our lumber and our potash and our crude oil from a single neighbor. In 2026, we do. Which means the damage from a 100% tariff will be faster, deeper, and more widespread than anything Smoot-Hawley ever caused. There's another parallel, the 1970s oil shocks. In 1973 and again in 1979, disruptions to oil supply caused energy prices to spike. Gas lines formed. Inflation exploded. The economy went into stagflation, a toxic combination of stagnant growth and rising prices. The tariff threat on Canadian oil is a self-inflicted oil shock. We're not being cut off by OPEC. We're not facing a Middle Eastern war. We're choosing to double the price of our own energy supply for political leverage. And the result will be the same: inflation, recession, declining living standards. The difference is, in the 70s, Americans could blame foreign producers. In 2026, there's only one place to point: Washington. So here's where we are. The threat of a 100% tariff on Canada is not an abstract geopolitical maneuver. It is a direct attack on your wallet. $12,000 added to the price of your car. $80,000 added to the price of your house. $1.80 added to every gallon of gas you buy. 15 to 20% added to your grocery bill. And for what? To punish Canada for signing a trade deal with China? To prove that America can go it alone? The trade war is real, and you are the collateral damage. Let me make this personal. I've been looking at the consumer price data for months, tracking the inflation numbers, watching how tariffs move through supply chains. And what I keep coming back to is this: the people who will suffer most from these tariffs are not the people making the decisions. The politicians in Washington won't feel it. They have staff, they have drivers, they have salaries that insulate them from price shocks. The CEOs and lobbyists pushing for protection won't feel it. They'll pass the cost to consumers and protect their margins. But the family trying to save for a down payment on their first house will feel it. The single parent commuting an hour each way to work will feel it when gas hits $5.50. The retiree on a fixed income will feel it when their grocery bill goes up 20%. This is a regressive tax. It hits hardest on the people with the least ability to absorb it. And that's not an accident. That's how tariffs work. They're a consumption tax. The more you consume, the more you pay. But lower-income households spend a higher percentage of their income on the basics: housing, transportation, food. So they pay a higher percentage of their income in tariffs. Meanwhile, the industries that are supposedly being protected by these tariffs, American steel, American lumber, American manufacturing, they're not creating enough jobs to offset the jobs being lost in downstream industries. In 2018, when we tried this with 25% steel tariffs, we protected 137,000 steel jobs, but we put at risk 12 million jobs in industries that use steel. Automotive, construction, appliances, machinery. The math doesn't work. It never has, and it never will. Because in a modern economy, you can't isolate one sector and protect it without damaging 10 others. So what do you do with this information? First, understand that this is not a partisan issue. This is a math issue. Tariffs are a tax, and this tax will hit your household whether you voted red or blue. Second, check your budget. If you're planning to buy a house in the next year, understand that the price could jump by tens of thousands of dollars if this tariff goes through. If you're planning to buy a car, same thing. If you're on a fixed income, understand that your grocery bill is about to get a lot more expensive. Plan accordingly. Third, make noise. Call your representatives, especially if you're in a district that voted for the current administration, because the people making these decisions need to hear from the people who will pay the price. Trade policy shouldn't be made by presidential decree at 3 in the morning. It should be the result of careful analysis, consultation with industry, and a clear understanding of the costs. And fourth, recognize that this is a choice. None of this is inevitable. The U.S. and Canada have been each other's largest trading partners for decades. We've built an integrated economy that works for both sides. We can have disagreements about trade policy without blowing up the entire system. But if we choose to go down this path, if we actually implement a 100% tariff on Canadian goods, the consequences will be immediate and severe. Your next grocery trip will be more expensive. Your next tank of gas will cost more. Your dream of owning a home will get further away. The inflation bomb is real, and the fuse has been lit. The question now is whether we have the sense to put it out before it explodes.